you. We have about almost 20 minutes for questions. And one thing I'd ask is, since we're videotaping this, if you could repeat people's questions and then for your answers.
I'm just going to say the question I want asked. So,
about 1 o'clock, so go for it.
Oh, am I calling on people? Sure.
Hi, enjoyed the presentation, and I couldn't agree more that teachers matter. I think they also matter quite a bit at all levels, and obviously my passion right now is higher education. I wonder if you might talk about how teachers and instructors might be evaluated at colleges and universities as well, because we've got a lot of great researchers that are absolutely lousy teachers, and unfortunately, they're being paid to teach.
Right. Well, so the question was, how do we better evaluate teachers in college, right? And unfortunately, this is not an issue that I've really thought about very much. I focus entirely on K-12 education. I think you're right, though, and particularly at research universities where research is very, they say it's 40-40-20 for tenure, but research plays a higher role in a lot of other places. Place where I am, UCCS, teaching is much higher on that list. Yeah, I'm sorry. You asked a question I really don't have a very firm professional judgment on how to do it for.
How much of that would be translatable?
I don't know how much of it's translatable for a couple of reasons. One, and one of the reasons I like K-12 instead of higher ed is that if you ask 5 people in higher ed what it is the university actually does, what's the outcome we care about, you'll get 6 different answers, right? So one of the things here in K-12 is that we can use something like standardized test scores, which admittedly are still broad and not exactly what we want to get at, but at least math and reading is something we can all agree that, look, that's what we're after. If you're not reading at a high level and you can't solve basic math problems, then we're doing something wrong. So I think that kind of objective analysis is harder to do at the college level. I agree it's an important issue, but I think it's very, very complicated and outside of what I thought of.
I just wanted to jump in. Are you familiar with the National Council for Teacher Quality? I think probably a lot of people in the room are, but they've partnered with U.S. News and World Report to rate the 1,407 schools of ed in the country.
Yes, the schools of ed are very upset about this.
Very upset. And I have a feeling that will prompt change in the schools of ed.
Well, but that's actually, even still, I mean, that's important, and it'll be interesting to see what they come up with. But as far as what are political science professors doing, I mean, that's the other thing. Colleges are doing so many things that having kind of a uniform way to evaluate them seems tricky. Now that said, the way we evaluate people in college, well, I shouldn't say anything. I'm not tenured, so I have a stake in this.
Let somebody else ask a question and rescue Marcus right there. Go ahead.
I just was wondering, you've had retired professionals or people who, have reached the top of their profession and want to teach. And what I found in Colorado, they don't want those people in there, and they would be perfect because they could teach the students what works in the workday world, and why isn't this being addressed?
Right, so the question's about, what about newly retired people, aren't done with their lives, want to come in and provide their knowledge into students, right, teaching K-12 schools. And you're right, the vast majority of them can't do it, and the reason is they don't have a teaching certification. And that is the hurdles that I'm talking about here that are keeping potentially good teachers out of the profession. Now that said, not every business person who is going to be a great teacher. In fact, a lot of them aren't going to be very good at all. Not everyone who wants to teach is going to be great at it. In fact, it's really, really hard to be a great teacher. I don't want to do it. I'm glad that there's wonderful people out there who do it really well. The point here, though, is why should we be restricting access to the profession for them, right? Why should we not be allowing them to give it a try and then assessing them and figuring out whether they're doing a good or bad job? I think you're right. There are probably a lot of excellent people. So I have a PhD in economics. I am not qualified. I don't think I would probably be a very good K-12 public school teacher, but assuming I would be, my background in mathematics I am not qualified according to school systems to teach in public schools, right? That's a very strange system.
Back here. Yes.
Is the system that you're proposing, the retention system for good teachers, is it more expensive than what we're doing now in Colorado or as a country in general?
So Maybe yes, maybe no, right? So is a system of trying to retain higher quality teachers by raising their salaries, right? Is that a system that's going to be expensive, right? And expensive is something we can't do anymore, right? Because everyone's kind of out of money right now. So I mean, for starters, I think potentially yes. We could certainly see starting with the current system and just raising salaries on the top with new money, and that money would be very well used if it led to higher increased student achievement, right? So because we know that student achievement is related to economic output and things like that, so that might be a good investment. That said, there are ways that we could probably manipulate dollars within the current system that could be used in this better way. So one of the things I talk about in the book is that I have a short chapter on the retirement benefits. The teachers, one of the problems with teacher salaries is that they're very backloaded, and teacher compensation is that it's backloaded and not very heavy on the salary portion of their salaries, right? Which is not very good for younger teachers who might be effective. And those dollars might be able to be used to be front-loaded in the teacher salaries, and then also maybe disproportionately given to higher quality teachers. That said, I think we mostly are kind of talking about some new money here. But again, the fact that you're only giving it to one group of teachers makes this a little bit easier as well, right? Another problem with raising everyone's salary is that if you raise everyone's salary, you've raised everyone's salary, right? And so where the same amount of dollars gets spread over a much smaller base. If we're talking about raising the salary of teachers who are very effective, we're talking about a smaller pool.
Brian. It occurs to me that this really is something that would have to be phased in over time, and the reason is because of what you just said, it costs money. But when you open up access to the education profession, are the people that haven't gone through the education certification program, aren't they willing to take less money for that position? In other words, like if I were going to be a doctor and I've got to go through 4 years of medical school and 4 years of internship and residency and all that, I want a high salary for all those years that I put into my education to become a doctor. But if you're able to come out of school and become a teacher without going through the certification process, your investment to get the dollars is less.
It's so sorry to repeat again. So the question is about, if we remove if I'm understanding right, if we remove the certification requirement to allow everyone to enter teachers, maybe the need to increase teacher salaries isn't there as much because...
Well, you're increasing from a lower starting point.
You increase from a lower starting point. Yeah, it's certainly possible, right? But as you increase the pool, right, so maybe you can get people into the profession willing to accept lower dollars. Teacher salaries aren't very, I mean, they're higher than I think most people realize they are, but they're still not very high relative to other college graduates. So I think lowering that base further would be something I don't think we want to do. You know, it is the case, I think, that as the labor pool grows, you get people interested in the job for other reasons, right? Or willing to dip their toe in and leave before they become expensive on the school system. I do think, as far as, you know, all of this costs money, not all of it costs money. So removing the tenure system is potentially a cost saver, for instance. So for example, things like it's related to last in, first out, which I assume we have here in Colorado as well, right? Where if we have cuts to the teacher workforce because of budget cuts, essentially, then we don't remove the least effective teachers, we remove the least experienced teachers, the teachers who have been there the least amount of time. Now, this is a bad idea for a couple of reasons. One is that because experience isn't directly related to quality, you're just likely removing a good teacher as a bad teacher when you base it on years of experience. Two, because their salaries are based on experience, you've just removed the least expensive teacher in the building, which means that you have to remove, not quite 2 to 1, right, but you have to remove more teachers than you would if you were on the other end of the scale. Now, that's not to say we should start at the top either, right? So there might be some room to think about playing with that money if we're talking about this new crop of teachers coming in. But that said, I think myself and I think a lot of people like me are perfectly willing to pay teachers higher salaries. The problem is we want to pay teachers higher salaries for effectiveness, right? That just increasing salaries on a lump sum makes very little sense under the current system.
Marcia?
I would not disagree with you at all when you say that it doesn't need to be a great deal of money to reward the good teacher will go ahead and be a good teacher anyway. But I would add to it that your average teachers in the classroom who really are okay but need some coaching, the additional money, don't you think would add to the incentive for them to get better rather than to just stay where they are?
Well, potentially, right? So one of the things, one of the things standards does, right, tying things to test scores, it aligns everyone's incentives towards this goal that we've decided as a community or as a school board, right, that we're interested in, right? So it could focus their efforts in that direction by tying it to pay. It could, perhaps one of the reasons that master's degree and other professional development isn't very effective is because no one's rewarded if they actually get better at this anyway. So just do whatever. Maybe that will change. I think that's a longer term strategy. Right now we're talking about adding colleges and all these other things, and those are big rocks that don't like to move very much. But yeah, I think that's true. There are people, so we can think of it as a motivational effect to put more effort in the classroom. We can also think of it as a motivational effect to align what you're doing towards the goal that the school and the community has decided is the right thing to do.
We're in the process, and we're in the failing school district, we're in the process of doing a charter school. And one of the things, since we have people who've worked in this system, and several of them are not anymore, but one of the things that kept coming up is that, as an example of why this potentially is a failing school district, is, and this was brought up numerous times, they haven't tenured a math teacher in that high school for 10 years. And the educrats around us, forgive me, but I'm not one of them. And somehow then I'm looking at a charter school where we won't deal with a union, where we won't have this kind of issue, and yet it's being used as an example to me that the reason my local high school is failing is because they haven't tenured anybody in this tenure period. And if you could explain that to me a little, I'd appreciate it.
Okay, so I'll try to recap it as best as I can. So, it's interesting. So basically, the idea is that there's a school that's said to be ineffective because they haven't tenured a teacher for a long time, right? And this is the reason why they're not being effective. I'd say it's interesting. I'm not entirely sure what they meant by that comment.
Well, specifically the math department.
Right.
They said for 10 years they haven't tenured a teacher, and they're given that to me almost as an explanation, like, of course they're failing, they haven't.
Well, but the point I was going to make about that is so there's a couple of reasons you might not tenure. Actually, in public schools, it's very difficult not to tenure a teacher if they've been around for a little while, right? So the part of that comment that I would actually agree with them on is that if attrition there is so high that everyone just comes in and then says no and leaves, right? It isn't long enough to stick around for tenure. So what I'm saying is I don't think it's the tenure yes, the tenuring process I don't think has ever made anyone in college or anywhere. I shouldn't say that. I want tenure. I will work harder when I get tenure. So that itself doesn't produce the achievement. But it's under the current system where just about everyone's tenured after they reach a certain number of years. If attrition there is so high that they can't keep good teachers around long enough to get it, then I could see that being related to that being in an effective school. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Thanks.
Rick, and then Susie.
I've been principal of a small charter school, and we've discussed this a lot, having something like that, but the problem is that only 4 out of 20 of our employees have standardized tests to measure, and because we deal with the early learning center as well. So, and the same discussion goes on with the charter school is, what about the social studies teacher, the art teacher, the PE teacher, all the different employees in the same system, that how do you measure that?
Yeah, it's so how the point is a very good one, is that there's a lot of teachers out there that their students don't take standardized tests. So what in the world are we going to do about them, right? So for some of those subjects, we could move towards testing those things, right? Science and social studies are topics that very easily we could have standardized tests for them. And I think some states are moving that direction. Now that said, there's kids that are too young to have meaningful standardized tests, right? The error is enormous. And subjects like music and art, where in theory, so in New York City, in New York, for instance, they're mandated, they have to have assessments for all of these things. So they are working right now on an art assessment. Whether or not that's a good idea, I'm not entirely sure. But it's an interesting way of the way that they've built their law. It's certainly an important problem. I think in these areas that are not tested and where tests are less appropriate, then we're talking about a system that focuses much more on improving the subjective evaluations of teachers, right? And we can do that. You can't do that with the current rubber stamp, you're doing just fine. But you need things to look for teachers who's being effective or not, a rubric that matters. And also a willingness among principals to identify those teachers who aren't doing very well, which in charter schools, I think a lot of time we have, right, a willingness to do that because you can't actually remove the teachers. But I talk about in the book, there's some survey evidence. So in Chicago, for instance, one of the reasons every teacher gets a satisfactory rating is because the principals say, yeah, I know, there's a lot of my teachers in my building that are not doing very good, but I give them effective ratings. Why is that? Well, because if I give them an ineffective rating, only bad things happen to me. Right? All of this happened is I made the teacher upset. I added a lot of paperwork on my desk. All of her friends are upset, and by the way, I can't remove the teacher anyway, no matter how bad her rating is. So what am I supposed to do? Right? So as far as what do we do in the non-tested subjects, we need a real evaluation system, a real subjective evaluation system for them. And the only way you're going to get a real subjective evaluation system is if principals are held accountable for the quality of their schools and also have the power and the willingness to remove ineffective teachers that they observe.
I was just curious how much, if any, blowback you've had from the NEA and the AFT about your ideas.
You know.
Well, I love them.
Yeah,
sure,
sorry. So how much blowback do I get from the AFT and NEA? You know, so I actually go through great pains in the book, and actually I got to. There are many reformers who aren't very pleased with me because I don't think the unions are causing all these problems. They're really not. Now, they are certainly the defenders of a lot of it, right? They're a big reason we can't move forward with a lot of these policies. They are the obstacle in the way. But that said, a lot of these problems are problems we've had for a very, very long time, well before unions were actually politically powerful. So New York City, for instance, 98%, until last year or so, 98% of teachers are rated satisfactory, right? Researching this book, I came across a study done by a professor at Teacher College that was published in 1905, in which they observed that about 98% of the teachers in New York City are rated as effective, and this is crazy, and we need a real evaluation system that focuses. He didn't talk about outputs, and clearly they don't have test scores and things, right? But they need to reform the evaluation system and saying, yes, we're about to do that. And 103 years later, here we are, right? And that's way before teachers' unions had a political power. Now, and also teachers' unions popped up for some very important reasons. As I said in my talk, teachers really had a bad deal at one time. I think a lot of those things that tenure and other provisions were put in place for are now covered in federal law and not quite needed very much, as much codified in contracts. But as I said, they came from a need at the time. So I get wary of blaming the unions for creating all this. So they are the ones standing in the way of it. Now, also on top of that, I'd say how much the AFT and the NEA have moved in the last 5 or so years is amazing. Now Randy Weingarten, who I once testified with her, and I thought we were agreeing with each other, but she was very angry at me at Congress, and we went from that to where she says publicly, we need test scores as part of these evaluations. We need to rethink how teachers are evaluated. I think that there has been a move now, whether it's this heartfelt change from them or a recognition that change is coming and I want to be on the inside of making those changes. From my perspective, it's amazing how much move. Even the NEA has now come on board saying, yeah, test scores probably need to be involved in some of this, which was a really big push. So it takes a long time for a variety of reasons, right? They're in charge of protecting the interests of their members, many of whom find this threatening, and have been trying to make, particularly the AFT, some incremental changes forward. So I think the idea that a Democratic president of the United States stands up and is in favor of a lot of the stuff that I talked about today was unthinkable 5 years ago, right? So that's how far we've come, and that's how far I think the union's certainly not where I am and where I'd like them to be on a lot of these issues, but they have moved forward on a lot of it.
We have time for one more quick question. And
in our district, we have a hard time attracting math teachers, and science teachers are an issue too. And, you have any thoughts on any kind of market-based thing when you think of the years of experience, the steps and lanes,
So where is your district? Is it
kind of a competitive, for instance, a physics teacher or something that might be attracted by a higher salary in another field? Do you have any thoughts of?
So the question is about your school district. Is it rural area or is it just
Grand Junction? It's a small city.
Yeah. So small city school district has trouble recruiting good math and science teachers, right? It's a very common problem. In fact, this is why there's a lot of teachers teaching outside of their subject areas, right? In theory, No Child Left Behind said that doesn't happen anymore, but it does, right? So how do we attract those people? And in the book I talk about, I didn't talk about in the talk. So part of differential pay is paying teachers who are more effective. I also think we really need to explore differential pay based on the subjects for this. And it's not because math teachers are more important than our reading teacher, than is the third grade classroom teacher, right? And that's why teachers don't like this talk, right? Because that math teacher is not more important for me. What it is a recognition of what the labor force is, right? That the skills required to be a high school AP physics teacher are just different, command a different amount of money in the outside labor market than do the skills required to be a third grade teacher. And if we don't recognize that in the labor force, that means we have to dig far deeper in the labor force in those topics that are very, very important to us, like math and science. So I think differential pay based on subject is perhaps as much, if not more, controversial than pay for performance, but I think is certainly an avenue that needs to be thought of.
Thank you everyone for coming, for your great questions.
Thank you very much.